and Blondie and Major Hooper. This book, with all its life testifying that it's a miracle book of diversity and unity, of harmony and infinite complexity. This book, inestimable in value, infinite in scope, wide as the moral government of God, deep as the foundations of eternal justice. This book, inspired in totality, regenerated in power, personal in application. What have I done with this book? The Bible. Suppose I asked you today if you'd read a chapter in it today. Could you hold up your hand and say by that, yes, I have? I asked if you read 5 chapters or 3 chapters. Suppose I asked you tonight if you read 3 chapters in God's book today. I wouldn't ask if you've eaten 3 times. Of course, I suppose most of us have. I have eaten 3 times. More than I ought to have eaten, I suppose. Most people eat more than they ought to eat anyhow. And you know, I'm kind of sympathetic about this dieting business. I think you just well die eating. It's a diet, but anyway, people take care of their bodies for as feeding food is concerned, and sometimes abuse it for the way they stuff it and make it harder on their heart. How in the world can a heart go like it does sometimes? The way we load our stomachs and the things we put in it. A lot of people load their stomachs and then take out the cigarettes. I told my young people not long ago, I said if I was going to kiss a girl, I wouldn't want to smell a camel when I kissed her. I had a boy in my church, very brilliant boy, that wanted to go to Yale University. And you know what he told me? He said, you know, up there in Yale University, one of the professors asked the boy to tell us something about Golgotha. He said, Golgotha, not Golgotha, please. Please don't pronounce Golgotha. He said, Golgotha was a giant who slew the Apostle David. Ignorant of God's Word. And would be laughing if it wasn't so tragic. No, here in Virginia, and I have the figures from the Associated Press on file at home. Questionnaire was given to 18,634 high school students in Virginia, and 16,000 of them could name 5 of the apostles. And 10,000 could name 7 Old Testament prophets. And 5,000 could name but half the books in the Old Testament. And only a few hundred could name the books of the New Testament. And I was talking up here at Ridgecrest, North Carolina last week, where I went to our Baptist Training Union Assembly, where I spoke to 3,000 to 500 young people in the morning and over that many at night, because all of them tried to be perfect in their attendance. And one night I preached a sermon on the Bible not bound and cannot be broken. And I told some of these things, not exactly these things I'm telling you. And one young preacher came up to me and said, Dr. Lee, I'm going to tell you this, but I don't want you to spread it abroad too much. He said, in an examination in a seminary in the United States of America, 3 young preachers out of a class of 15 were asked to name the books of the Bible, and they couldn't write them out. So here's a young preacher going out to feed the saints, to win the lost. He can't write down the names of the books in the Old Testament. You tell him to tell you this 27th chapter of Hezekiah, he'd be looking all around for the book of Hezekiah. I want to ask you to ask yourself this question: what have I done with the Bible? Do I doubt any of it? Have you let some modernistic, liberalistic teachers twist you around and get you all awry about the infallible, inspired, inerrant Word of God, about this book in which there's no taint of error? You really believe the Bible? Do I really believe the Bible? I say to you, yes, I believe it. My mother taught me 3 things above some other things when I was a boy. And sometimes she seemed to have a prophetic outlook. She said, my son, you're going to be a preacher someday. And you're going to preach in a day when a lot of people are not going to believe the Bible like I believe it, but said, I'm asking you to believe the Bible like I believe it. And she said, I believe it all, though I don't understand it all. And I believe the Bible just like my mother believed it. She believed that God took care of Daniel in the lion's den, so do I. She believed that Jesus walked on the water and didn't walk along in the shallow water on the edge, on the ground, like somebody said. So do I. She believed that Balaam's ass talked, so do I. And she preached a better sermon than some of these preachers in America, where Tom Paine could occupy some professedly Christian pulpit and be called Reverend Tom Paine, D.D. And I mean that. That's one thing she taught me, never to doubt God's book. And she said, believe it, love it, learn it, and preach it the best you can. And she taught me to hate liquor. And if I had one hand, my head was in favor of liquor any time, anywhere, I'd pull it out. If I had one toe wiggle like it's going to vote for liquor, I'd chop it off. And it's not silly. There's a little poem I wrote. Jack and Jill went up the hill to get some legal liquor. Jack went blind and lost his mind, and Jill is even sicker. That's not silly. That's nonsense. Not nonsense. A little woman crept into my office just 6 weeks ago, and I could tell you the number of her house if I was so minded. She came into me on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock because I go to my office pretty early, some of the time, not all the time. And she came in and she said, Dr. Lee, I hate to bother you. She said, you know, last week my husband came home drunk. She said, we have 4 children. And the little baby makes 5. And she said, I went down to the blood bank and sold some of my blood to get some money to buy some food for my children while my husband had spent the paycheck and lying at home dead drunk with the booze he'd drunk. And she said, my children haven't had anything to eat since yesterday morning. She said, that's a whole 24 hours. And they're hungry. Oh, Dr. Lee, help me. And she said, if anybody could go through what I've gone through with a drunken husband, they'd never criticize you like they do for lambasting liquor like you lambast it. I gave her some money to help get some food to feed her children. And when she walked out the door, beautiful mother that she was, with her face so sad and her heart so heavy and so concerned, I said, oh God, if there are more words that you can give me to describe and lambast that awful thing, give them to me. You can say lots nicer things about a skunk in a perfume factory than you can say about beer. You can say lots nicer things about a rattlesnake in a kindergarten than you can say about booze. Yet we have a lot of folks who profess to be Christian with that little old cocktail party. I want the preacher to preach a little sweet, let not your heart be troublesome to them when they come to church and twist around like an old hen making a nest and say, here I am, apologize to me for coming out to hear a gump like you preach. Third thing my mother taught me was to look upon a girl as holy. And I thank God she did. But I'm asking you tonight, what have I done with this Bible? I believe it like my mother believed it. This is a book my father touched with reverent hands. This is a book that my mother stained with grateful tears. This is a book that's the softest pillow for a dying head. This is a book that's the sharpest sword against the devil and his host. What have I done with it? There's another thing. I'd like to ask you to ask yourself this question. What have I done with prayer power? God promises to give us power in prayer and bring to pass things. The same God who heard Abraham, the same God who heard Moses, the same God who heard David and Elijah and Elisha and Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Paul and the apostles is the same God. He's the same tonight that he was way back there, and he's just as mighty as he was then. He's just as wise as he was then. What have I done with this thing called prayer? And prayer opportunity, and prayer power, and prayer responsibility. What have I done with it? do I pray. Well, others have prayed and things came to pass. Mr. Spurgeon on one occasion wanted to enlarge his auditorium because a lot of folks couldn't get in to hear him preach. He had 36 deacons, 30 odd, some of them pretty odd. I've never had trouble with deacons. When they get bad and mean, I just ask them to resign. Years ago, I called in all the deacons I had in my church, and I told them I loved them all, and I said, but you're all just sitting around here doing nothing. All of you talking about how long you've been in as deacon, some of you 40 years and 45 years, and I think Dr. English put that in my biography. I don't know whether he did or not, but I had an idea he did. I called them all in, told them I want to resign. I want to resign like Christians. And I'd go out and say I was kicking them out. And I said, I want to put in some young men who'll do the job, and I want you to give them a banquet when you get out and they get in. You try that sometime. You won't be there very long. But I did it after prayer. And so Mr. Spurgeon called his 36 deacons together and told them that it had been on his heart. They'd all talked about it before that and said they couldn't afford that much money. It'd take $80,000, which was a big pile of money back in those days. And they had certain amounts to the auditorium. And he said, now I want all of you who believe that it ought not to be done and can't be done and don't want it done, I want you to leave, and the rest of us will stay and pray and ask God to help us to do it. And 30 of them left. And Mr. Spurgeon and his 6 other deacons stayed there and prayed, and 2 weeks after that, somebody, and he didn't know who it was until the day he died, somebody put $80,000 in the bank to the credit of Mr. Spurgeon in the tabernacle. That's an answer to prayer. Just as much an answer to prayer as it was when Hagar prayed and the angel of the Lord appeared, as when Abraham prayed and Lot was delivered, as when Joseph prayed and was exalted to the prime minister of Egypt. Just as much an answer to prayer as when Moses cried and Amalek was put to confusion, when Joshua prayed and the walls of Jericho fell. Just as much an answer to prayer as when Noah prayed and Samson was born, and when Samson prayed and 1,000 Philistines plunged to their death. As when Hannah prayed and Samuel was born, and on I might go. I want to ask you to ask yourself this question: what do I do with this prayer thing, this prayer power, the greatest power in the world? What do I do with it? What have I done with it up to this minute? Pray ye, said Jesus, the Lord of the harvest, that he send forth laborers into his harvest. The book tells us that Jesus arose a great while before day, went out into a mountain apart to pray. If we had more Christian people rise a great while before day and go somewhere and pray for our preachers and pray for our nation and pray, how more greater things would be done than have ever been done in this world for the glory of God. Little fellow came down to my house one day. I don't know whether he came so often. He's moved away now, but he used to come real often. I think he came not because he loved me so much, but because he knew I had candy and peanuts stuck around in a lot of corners. And so when he walked in one day, he never knocked at the door. He just twisted the knob, and I said, "Son, why don't you knock on the door?" He said, "This is home, ain't it?" And I said, "Come on in." He just turned the knob, and here he was standing right there, no matter what is going on in the house. He's right there, and he came in, and President Eisenhower was on television, talked about 3 or 4 minutes about the Red Cross or some sort of charity. When he got through, this little fellow turned to me and said, "Doc, if you could talk to all the folks in the United States of America for just 3 minutes, what would you say?" Well, I'd already told my people what I would say in a sermon about 2 weeks before that, and I was ready for it. I said, "Son, here's what I'd say. God talking about his people and indirected to them. He said, if my people will hear my voice and obey my commandments, I'll be an enemy to thine enemy, an adversary to thine adversaries. I will contend with them that contend with thee, and thine enemies who come out against thee one way shall flee from thee 7 ways." That's what we need.